Welcome to OCASI's Anti-Racism Webinar Series for 2023, Racial Equity from Intention to Action. We had the first three series last year in 2022. So this is Anti-Racism Webinar Series 2023, Racial Equity from Intention to Action. And today is with Jinha, our moderator for the next three of our webinars in the series. Today, our panel is on community safety, race, and policing. I want to welcome Jin and our panelists, and especially to welcome you as our colleagues in the sector concerned about issues of racism and about confronting and combating racism in all its forms. I want to acknowledge that this webinar is being hosted on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. Toronto is now home to many Indigenous peoples, as we know, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It is important to us from the outset to express our solidarity with Indigenous communities across Turtle Island who continue to experience colonial violence, including intersectional gender-based violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. At OCASI, we have made a commitment in our most recent strategic plan to be an ally by incorporating the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and the calls to justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's and Girls Report into all of our policy and advocacy work. OCASI has also been engaged in a number of priority initiatives, including addressing racial equity in the immigrant and refugee serving sector through conducting an environmental scan, developing an anti-racism, confronting anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism framework for policy and practice. That work is coming along and we're very excited about it. Included in that work as a companion piece is a partnership with the City of Toronto and our Indigenous colleagues, including from Council Fire, we are working on developing a guide for the sector on Indigenous relations. As part of our capacity development mandate, we have made an ongoing commitment to build our own internal capacity, as well as the capacity of the immigrant and refugee serving sector to deepen our understanding of the history of the original inhabitants of this land and to build relationships of solidarity with Indigenous communities. We have done this through revising our existing course content, including keynote speakers and guests to facilitate deep conversations in our annual professional development conferences, our national gender-based violence conferences, and webinars such as we have with our anti-racism series. In this month, when we remember, celebrate, and commemorate the many Black people who have contributed in building the nations of the Americas, I want to acknowledge and call on my ancestors whose ingenuity and deep knowledge of self supported their survival of the brutal experience of the transatlantic slave trade and their enslavement over 400 years in these lands, including here in this place we now call Canada. It is because of their struggle, the struggle of my ancestors for liberation and freedom, a struggle that is ongoing and that this conversation is a part of, that I sit here today. And so I pay homage and I give thanks to them. I'll let you sit with that and just acknowledge from where it is that you're joining us today. It is, as I said, a great pleasure to introduce our moderator for our next three series of webinars. I'm so thankful, Jin, that you've agreed to come on board and work with us with this. Many of you may know Jin, especially those of you from the Toronto area, but Jin, from grassroots organizing to nonprofit leadership, Jin has supported and led change efforts in communities, organizations, and nonprofit sectors, and collaborated with residents and decision makers across the city. Jin has over 2 decades of experience in the nonprofit sector, with experience in community development, civic engagement, settlement program development, sector development, and organizational development and change management. She has also worked in the women's and 2S LGBTQ plus health, adult and popular education, and community arts, and was co-editor of Hankut, Critical Art and Writing by Korean Canadian Women. Jin is currently the Executive Director of Social Planning Toronto and serves on the board of T, the Toronto Environmental Alliance. Jin, the floor is yours. I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thanks for that really wonderful, powerful, beautiful message of the introduction that you just shared. It's so great to be with all of you. Being in the immigrant and refugee serving sector and being with all of you always feels like coming home. So it's lovely to be moderating and co-hosting this series of panel, and we have an exciting lineup of really wonderful speakers today. So as Debbie had mentioned, you know what, first I want to say, you may have already realized that we have simultaneous interpretation in French, and we also have the option to follow by closed captioning in English. So if you want the interpretation in French and you have not done so already, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and choose the French option. And for closed captioning, you can press that button and ask for that option. I hope you can see that. I don't see that in my options anymore for some reason, but I did earlier. So I'm hoping that you can see it. Yes, captions. And just let the panelists know if any of you are having trouble with that piece. So as Debbie had said earlier, this webinar series is part 2 of a series that OCASI has been offering. And this one's focused on racial equity from intention to action. And this is the first of 3 sessions we'll be having over the next month or so. And this is really a webinar and conversation series, we like to think of it, and it's for the Ontario immigrant and refugee serving sector to help us move from intention to action in understanding systemic racism, addressing racial discrimination, and building towards racial equity in the sector and beyond. So throughout the 3 sessions of the series, guest experts will speak about community safety, policing and alternatives, and countering hate and discrimination. And we'll talk about how this all impacts the immigrant and refugee serving sector as we work towards advancing racial equity. So today, our first in the series of 3 conversations, we will focus on race, community safety, and policing. Many advocates and community members have been calling out systemic racism and discriminatory practices amongst police for decades or more. And it's only been in the past 3 years since George Floyd was murdered by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that these racist practices have been more widely seen and understood by the general public, or more specifically by those who are not Indigenous, Black, Muslim, migrant, or sex workers, or unhoused individuals. There's more open dialogue now about how colonialism, racism, and other forms of oppression, including Islamophobia, are embedded in all our institutions, including the police, and how some of us feel safer and protected by police, while others feel targeted and whose lives are at risk when interacting with police. At Social Planning Toronto, we're just coming out of the Toronto City budget process, where community safety and the role of the police has been one of the top issues for 2 years in a row. When the city introduced the draft 2023 budget in January, it included a $48 million increase to the police budget. Meanwhile, funding for a pilot focused on alternative community-based responses to mental health crises was minimal in comparison. Unhoused individuals were being left out in the cold, and the initial budget didn't even include an inflationary increase for community organizations funded by the city, which effectively amounted to a cut for organizations playing a critical role, working with communities to make them stronger and safer, and to address some of the root causes of violence, including poverty and housing insecurity. As you can imagine, policing and issues of community safety are a very polarizing issue in this context. And it's clear that facts alone do not guide the dialogue, and decisions around how much funding to give the police and the role they should play in making communities safer, more livable, and well. Research has shown that police do discriminate and that more officers do not necessarily correlate to less crime and reduced violence. So why do some people still feel that increased police presence is what will increase community safety? What's clear is people define community safety differently. Different populations are treated differently by the police. and that what makes you feel safe is not necessarily tied to what is actually safe. So what makes you feel safe? What makes the immigrants and refugees you work with feel safe? Whether they have secure status, whether they're Black, racialized, are women, transgendered, or gay. And what do you do when you feel unsafe? Can you call the police and have confidence they will protect you? Will they protect your clients? What do we need to understand within the immigrant and refugee serving sector about race, community safety, and policing to support communities better and help build a more equitable and just Canada? And what do we need to understand about how Black bodies, racialized bodies, women, girls, trans and gender non-binary bodies are treated differently and have differential access to safety? And what can we do about it? So today, our guest experts will share their experiences of how community safety looks and feels like for different people, and what we can do to make communities safer for everyone. But first, we have a question for all of you. As a warm-up, we have a poll, and it's tied to this polarizing issue. And the poll is anonymous, so please be as honest as possible. I'm going to ask Shaipreet to put the poll up on the screen. So the question is, what do you think of defunding the police? And pick the answer that's as close to your beliefs as possible, your opinion as possible. So the first option is, I don't know enough to say. The next is, I don't support defunding the police. Next, I would like to see extensive police reform, not defunding. Or I'm not sure, I'm still deciding. Or number 5 is, I would like to see reduced police budgets and reduced police roles. Or I support defunding and abolishing police. So all the participants can vote. Please go ahead. And we'll share the results when we have enough of them. So we'll just give you a minute. How are we doing, Shaipreet? Are we getting enough responses?
Yeah, we're getting majority of responses right now.
Okay, are we ready to share the results?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. The majority of you said, I would like to see extensive reform. And then the next popular is, I'd like to see reduced police budgets. The next one is, I don't know enough to say. There's a few of you that would like to see defunding and abolishing of the police. And then there's some of you that are still deciding. And then a very small percentage, just one person that does not support defunding the police in any way. All right. That's very helpful to know who's in the room and where you're sitting with all of this. Thank you so much for that. It's helpful for the panelists too, as they speak about their perspectives on community safety. So for this session today, if you didn't catch it, there's options for French interpretation. If you click the interpretation button below, as well as closed captioning, if you click the captioning button below. The way that we have things planned for today is I will introduce the 3 speakers one at a time, and then I will give them a chance to introduce themselves as well and talk about their work and themselves and their perspectives. And then next we have a number of prepared questions that we will ask them, and they'll take turns answering those questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And you're welcome to share your questions throughout the session, and we'll gather them for the end of the session. So without any further ado, is that the right saying? I'm questioning myself. I often say English is not my first language, but it's the only language I speak. It has an impact on me. Okay, so first I'm going to introduce Fareeda Adam. So Fareeda is a staff lawyer at the BLAC Legal Action Center, BLAC, and she is a graduate of McMaster University and the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law. Fareeda articled at a criminal defense law firm and then continued to work in this field after being called to the Bar of Ontario in 2015. She has worked for Legal Aid Ontario in various capacities, dealing with low-income Ontarians in both the family and criminal law context. Fareeda has developed a particular interest in the intersections of youth criminal justice, police accountability, and human rights. And since beginning her legal career, Fareeda has learned of the importance of naming anti-Black racism and using a critical race framework to meaningfully understand the interactions Black people have with legal institutions. So, Fareeda, that was your official bio. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit further? Welcome, Fareeda.
Thank you, Jen, and I thank you for the folks at OCASI for inviting me. I'm just going to share my screen a little bit. So my name is Fareeda Adam. I am a staff lawyer at the BLAC Legal Action Center. I started working at BLAC in 2019 when its doors opened. And to tell you a little bit about the work that I do at BLAC, BLAC, our overall mandate is to combat anti-Black racism, and we do that by working individually and systemically. And you can see there that there are different areas of law that we work in. The work that I do at BLAC is related to police complaints and a lot of prison law matters. And so that can look like someone who has interacted with the police and was assaulted, someone who was being followed by police and not sort of not given the reason as to why. We have cases where some folks allege that they've been sexually assaulted by police. And so what we do at BLAC is that we work with the OIPRD. It's the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. It's the oversight body for police services. We do a little bit of work as well systemically at the SIU. But we use those mechanisms to strategically litigate cases of police discrimination, violence, police brutality, you name it. And I'll get into a little bit more of what our work looks like. But I want to end on the mission of BLAC Legal Action Center and our vision. And the vision always sort of helps me focus in terms of what I'm going to be discussing. And I love reading it. So I'm going to take my opportunity to read it now. And our vision at BLAC is a society where anti-Black racism is named and meaningfully addressed, where the humanity and dignity of Black people are centered, where the laws and the legal systems are reflective of the real experiences of Black people, and where racial equity and the full participation of all Black people in society is achieved. So it's a lofty goal, but that's what we do, and hopefully we can get more into it as we continue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fareeda. That is really a beautiful vision statement. Thanks for sharing that. So next I'm going to introduce Audrey. Audrey Huntley is of European settler and Indigenous ancestry. She was born in Calgary, Alberta, and moved to Europe as a young adult. She returned to Turtle Island in 1998 and has been involved in anti-colonial struggles in British Columbia and Ontario ever since. Audrey is a documentary filmmaker, a paralegal based in Toronto, the co-founder of No More Silence, and works at Aboriginal Legal Services Toronto. Welcome, Audrey. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Miigwech, thank you, Jen, and thank you for the invitation today. I'm really honored to be sharing this Zoom platform with such amazing panelists, such as Fareeda and Elene. I'm going to just see if I can share my screen and introduce a little bit of my work with No More Silence. So like the name kind of indicates, we initially were very much focused, we're an Indigenous group of women and with some allies working together with us. And our main focus is around missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, trans and two-spirit people. When we started out, it was really necessary to call us No More Silence because there was a lot of silence around this issue. It's been about 20 years now since we've been doing this work. If anybody had the opportunity to join us on February 14th, we were at police headquarters for the 18th year. Really boggles my mind that we have been going there for 18 years and holding the strawberry ceremony. You can see some of the folks going by here who are involved in our work. We initially started the strawberry ceremony in solidarity with Vancouver's downtown east side, where they've been holding a memorial march for 32 years. So understand, this is really a systemic issue. This is about ongoing colonization and ongoing attempted genocide. We no longer really need to talk about breaking the silence, because it has definitely been broken. But around 10 or so years ago, we shifted into looking at why has breaking the silence not changed anything in terms of the ongoing overrepresentation and like high rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, trans and two-spirit people. And we started to focus less around ensuring that the media do their job with proper reporting on this. You know, there's even been a national inquiry that released a report also framing the issue as genocide. And so we shifted our work at that time. You'll see one of our pages here is reflecting the community-led database that we started, because we did not trust the mainstream institutions to be doing proper record keeping. And it was actually after we started doing this work, this is a list that we unfortunately for Ontario keep having to add to every year before we have our ceremony on February 14th. We've added new names, and the brochure that we hand out is, you know, the list is getting too long to fit on 2 pages. So basically doing the work that the mainstream institutions, settler colonial institutions, aren't doing, and building our own community safety. That's just a quick start to what we've been doing for the past 20 years. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Audrey. So next, I'm going to introduce our third speaker, Elene Lam, who's an activist, community organizer, educator, and human rights defender. She's the executive director of Butterfly, which is an Asian and migrant sex worker support network. And she's been involved in working with sex workers and labor, migrant workers, working on gender and racial justice for over 20 years. And she is a PhD candidate at McMaster University. Welcome, Elene. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here with Fareeda and Audrey, amazing speaker and activist. And I would also like to show some picture, because the picture may help you guys to learn a little bit more about the work of Butterfly. Butterfly is an Asian and migrant sex worker support network. So we fight for migrant sex worker justice in order to do it. And so actually we do a lot of work, including community organizing, outreach, and the advocacy work is also a very important piece of our work. And we also provide a lot of emergency support. So, and one of the things, and many people think that our police is someone to protect, but for actually migrant sex worker, police is the major source of violence. So that's why we also do a lot of advocacy work. Particularly, there are many harmful policy against the sex worker, particularly racialized migrant sex workers. So, and so that we provide support for people they are facing the challenge in the legal system, and also like advocacy for the justice together with them. And so we also fight against some specific law is really harmful, particularly many cities now, they have the policy shut down the Asian massage parlor, for example, Newmarket and Toronto, they also propose to shut down all the Asian massage parlor before. So that we also make public to know about the issue and organize the worker together to advocate for their rights. And so this is the image that how the workers collectively come together to learn about the rights and also fight together. So this is also some image that how they push back the harmful policy against them. And ending racism, particularly ending Asian racism, is very important. But in our work, it's also very important to show the solidarity of with Indigenous community, Black community, and other BIPOC. And because what we see is like often we are being divided to fight against each other. So that's why it's also very important learning about the story of like a different community and build the solidarity. And so there is some image that we would like to end the discrimination against sex worker, to end the moralistic agenda often imposed to the sex worker, and also building the power of the workers, women and racialized people, instead of building more power of police. So, and we are also part of the Migrant Rights Network. We are also fighting for the Status for All campaign. So, and we also develop some different resources. We have some online training. If you are interested, I know here have a lot of frontline workers, so that you can also go to our website to learn more different resources. And I think this is so important that we talk about this issue, and particularly we are not only talk about the racial justice, but how to talk about from intention to action. I really like this title, and thank you for including sex worker voices in this platform, because sex worker, particularly migrant sex worker, often being left behind by many organizing work. And thank you so much. I'd love to check more later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elaine. And we will have some resources to share at the end of the webinar, and it'll be sent to you by email as well. So don't worry about scrambling to catch those details. So first, I'd like to ask each of our wonderful guest speakers to please share what safety looks and feels like, and also doesn't feel like, in the communities you work with. And I'd like to invite Audrey to speak first.
Hi, thanks so much for allowing me to speak about this. So, I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind when I think about safety is I think about just how often I'm encountering community members who've been assaulted, who've experienced violence. I'm also sitting right now in the intake room of Aboriginal Legal Services, although I'm not wearing my Aboriginal Legal Services hat, but obviously there's a lot of overlap between what I do with No More Silence and what I do every day in my 9-to-5 job, because I'm the victim rights paralegal here. And what is so striking to me is that when folks experience these horrific acts, they're often, just so many different layers of racism that folks encounter in everyday life, whether it's just systemic, institutional, or it's like a physical attack on the body, but people are not comfortable getting help. And that's actually what, when I first started doing this work around missing and murdered Indigenous women, I was actually at CBC television back in the day, around 2003, 2004. And I had the opportunity to do a cross-country road trip and ask people who had lost a loved one about their experience of losing that loved one. And one of the themes that came up over and over again is how when they asked for help, they didn't get any help, but instead received, awful, either overt anti-Native racist commentary by the police, who would just dismiss the disappearance of the loved one as another drunk Indian, who is just vagrant and has moved on. They don't have a known address. They're just out partying. And that unfortunately hasn't changed in all the decades that I've been doing this work. I still encounter that here at ALS, that we have people doing intake, and that it has to be accompanied by an official voice, like a paralegal or a lawyer, walking that person to the police station or making the call on their behalf before they will actually do their job. So that goes back to 2004, when I was assisting folks whose loved ones had not survived, who were murdered, who had gone missing and who ended up being found murdered or were never found. In the cases of folks who experience violence and survive, I also encounter this on the daily, that they choose not to report. As a filmmaker, I've been creating video resources around this that hopefully we'll include at the end of after the session, focused on educating service providers. So that the first one I made was called "Don't Need Saving: Aboriginal Women and Access to Justice," because women would not go and report, because they would be accused of, they would be asked if they had been drinking, or if they were alcoholics, or if they were drug addicts, and would not seek medical attention for those very same reasons. A lot, as mentioned by Elene, often sex workers are left out of receiving good service provision because they're blamed for what happens to them. It's really important for No More Silence. It's always been really important for us to include and center those voices, because those are the voices of who experiences the highest rates of violence. Sex workers, in particular, trans and two-spirit folks. And those people are most afraid of seeking help. So safety does not look like going to the police for our community. And I think I get a chance to talk about what safety looks like. I think, or I'm supposed to talk a little bit about, so safety, what it looks like for us is building our community's capacity. Like if anybody had the opportunity to attend the strawberry ceremony last Tuesday, it was incredible. It was one of those moments where hundreds and hundreds of people, we know over 600 people, because we handed out more than 600 strawberries and they were all gone. And it's like holding ceremony at a place that is often not safe for people. Toronto Police Headquarters is where we go. We go there to underline the systemic nature of the violence and to underline the complicity of the police. That's why we're there, you know, and we take that place over. Wanda was like really clear in saying, this is our home and we're here taking, this is an assertion of sovereignty for us to go there. We don't get a permit and we don't ask for permission. We just go. And it's in holding ceremony together that community feels the safest. And that's something that No More Silence is focusing on in our disability justice project as well, where we were in negotiations with the city for almost 2 years, because the city of Toronto has expressed a commitment to the calls to justice that came out of the national inquiry. And one of the very explicit calls is around healing and using traditional ceremony to facilitate that. And so we were trying to work with the city to get a site for a sweat lodge, which is one of the most important ceremonies that we have as Indigenous people. And they professed, you know, they did pay lip service to that commitment. And unfortunately, we were jumping through all the hoops that we could think of jumping through. Typically, we don't even work with mainstream institutions. We're very independent and grassroots and have decided not to become part of any settler colonial structures. And I have to say, we were just reaffirmed in that decision because it came to nothing. And we spent so many hours doing educational work on so many Zoom calls that ate up so much of our time. And we did not get the site that we said we were going to get. So now we're going to be building this lodge at Six Nations, which is a bit of a ride away, a bit of a drive, but we're going to be taking people there to do this work in a fully accessible lodge that Wanda Whitebird, who led the strawberry ceremony, will be leading there. So that's all for now. Miigwech.
Thanks so much, Audrey. So Fareeda, can you please share what safety looks and feels like in the communities you work with, or doesn't feel like?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in terms of what safety looks like for Black communities, it's pretty complicated, as you all probably know and all can suspect. In similar ways as Indigenous communities, Black communities don't necessarily look at police and have this sense of safety. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the work that we do and how we see this manifest. So the first thing is, when we take a look at the Black population in Ontario, we see that we have a relatively small Black population in the province of Ontario. What we know is that the majority of Black people in Ontario live in Toronto. We also know that the majority of, or there's a large percentage of our population that are young. We have a lot of youth in our group. And the last statistic, the 53%, is that the majority of Black people in the province of Ontario are not from Ontario, so they were born in other countries besides Canada. And so that's going to frame, I think, some of the issues that a lot of our clients and our community members encounter, including myself, on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's first important for me to just be clear about what I mean by anti-Black racism. Anti-Black racism is defined by policies and practices rooted in Canadian institutions, such as education, healthcare, and the justice system that mirror and reinforce beliefs, attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination towards people of African descent. And all of that is rooted in the history of colonialism and slavery. And that term, anti-Black racism, was coined by Dr. Akua Benjamin, a professor of social work at the University of Ryerson. And so when we talk about anti-Black racism and how it manifests, or rather the safety that we find Black people, or we're asking, do Black people feel when they're engaging with police? The answer is no, and it shows up in certain ways. We see it in policing, in racial profiling. So we see it in over-policing. So we see a large presence of police officers in certain neighborhoods, in certain communities. And then we see under-policing, right? We see those communities that are in need of support or help, or reporting robberies or any other criminal activity, having police officers not necessarily being the most responsive to those communities. We see this lack of safety manifest in our bail system. So when you get charged with a criminal offense, we see with a lot of Black individuals, there is an over-reliance on sureties for bail and strict conditions when it comes to bail releases, or even things like probation orders, where they're really strict conditions and conditions that would set somebody up for failure, conditions that may set somebody up for a failure to comply, that kind of thing, which leads to further criminal charges. We see that in the lack of recognition of anti-Black racism in sentencing, right? We have some case law that recently acknowledged the existence of anti-Black racism and suggested ways that judges could interpret the experience and the impact of anti-Black racism. And so we see a bit of a reluctance there to acknowledge how anti-Black racism manifests in terms of an individual's choices or what somebody thinks they can do. We see it also in prison conditions, security classifications. We see it in jobs, certain jobs that certain people can't get. We have a number of clients who don't get certain jobs in custody, jobs that would give them more money, more access. We also see it in parole decisions. And I also put child welfare, education system, employment, and immigration, because for us at BLAC, it's very important that we say policing is not just about the police officers. It's really about the entire system of surveillance on Black people. And so they're all connected, right? So a criminal matter can be related to a child protection matter, that can be related to an immigration law matter, that can be related to a housing matter. And so all is a way and form of policing folks in our community. And I'm gonna end on this. I think fundamentally the reason why people in our community feel a sort of reluctance to trust police is because there's an overwhelming stereotype and understanding of Black people as being innately criminal. And again, this is rooted in the legacy of slavery and colonialism of this country, of Canada, not just the United States. And so if you Google arrest Toronto, these are the images that come up. And I think that's really important when we think about the impact of anti-Black racism, how we even think about criminality. And even in our subsequent conversation about defunding or reimagining policing, or sort of reconstituting policing as we see it, just keep these sort of images in mind, and the sort of burden and the emotional labor that Black people have to engage in when we're even talking about these systems. So I guess to answer the question overall, I would say that safety for Black populations and police is non-existent in the files and the clients that we work with. And I think this is why the conversation about reimagining how policing could look like in a different way, I think is really important to Black communities. So I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Fareeda. So Elene, please share what safety looks and feels like in the communities you work with.
Yeah, and I think thank you so much. And because like how like different people with different background is being targeted by police very differently, and also how the safety meaning to them is very differently because of what they are facing in the society. And I think for Butterfly, it's very important we see community safety is not only free from the violence, including robbery, including assault, including murder, But this is also very important to free from the violence of the law enforcement, particularly police, CBSA, by law enforcement officer. They are the major source of violence against the sex worker and massage worker. And so when we talk about safety, we also talk about how people are free from fear. The fear is like they don't need to worry when they go to report the crime, they will be arrested. They don't need to worry when they go to renew the license, they will report to CBSA. They also do not need to fear when they take this TTC, the police will stop them, racial profile them, or like even arrest them. And so that the free from fear is so important, but that is like something very difficult for many marginalized community, particularly with the the scale of policing in Canada, and particularly in Toronto and many cities. And the other thing, what we talk about safety, is also free from discrimination, and how people can free to participate in the society, and also to be to have the chance to actualize themselves, how they can have freedom to be together with their community and to be themselves. But what we see, policing, instead of promoting the safety, the policing actually is prevent people from participation in the society in so many ways, assessing support and service, but also they are the major source of violence and also create a fear for many of the community members. And I think recently have a lot of people concerned about like community safety, and particularly community safety is being used with many politicians to create the moral panic to ask for more the expansion of police power. So, but when we see what is they talk about, is often is promoting the discrimination of some specific marginalized community, for example, sex worker, for example, homeless people, drug user, and also racialized people. And we often hear say that, like the government say, there is the massage parlor, they are endangers the neighborhood. There is the street-based sex worker, homeless sex worker on the park, they are endanger the safety of the children, right? That is always being provoked the society and make the people to increase the stigma and discrimination. So that's why when we talk about the community safety, to eliminate those discrimination of different community, and particularly those who are marginalized, those are stigmatized. I think this is also very important when we talk about community safety, and particularly this is a very important platform to for us to recognize what means safety. Is it because we feel, sometimes we feel have the feeling of fear? Is it because we don't know that person, or because there is some stereotype or discrimination against particular people make us have that kind of fear? And so that I think this is also very important, that we are also need to work together to eliminate a lot of discrimination against different marginalized community. And when particularly the people of power, they are calling for more like a policing and police power, increase the funding of make us safe, make the society safe, is often not true. One of the example is of the city of Toronto, with some of anti-sex work, anti-trafficking group that they advocate for more policing in the massage parlor. And so that very different with the Black community, they don't like put the label of criminal there, but they could put the label of the workers are traffic victim. But at the same thing, it's like they call in the law enforcement now have more than 8 by law enforcement officer only investigate 400 massage parlor. They go there every day, all the time, harass the worker. But this is the government is using the community safety as an excuse actually to police a certain group of people, and some of the worker is being arrested and detained and deported as a result of that. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Such powerful stories here from Audrey and from Fareeda and Elaine about the impact of the police on different communities and the feelings of safety and what that doesn't look like and does look like. I'm just really struck by how it's embedded, obviously, so intensely in, from the origins of our colonial state and how we needed policing to police Indigenous bodies, to every aspect that Fareeda talked about, from the way that communities are policed, over-policed and under-policed through bail hearings, the legal system, incarceration, post-incarceration through employment, and then the ways in which Elene talks about how even by victimizing massage parlor workers and through the use of enforcement through bylaw officers, we're seeing people being policed in different ways. And we certainly saw that on the TTC recently too, when there was a lot of concern about community safety issues on transit. And then the solution that the city of Toronto thought was the best approach was to bring more police officers onto transit, who ended up harassing folks who were unhoused and who were struggling for different reasons. So there's lots of challenges, obviously, around the police and certain communities. I think, Fareeda, you even said that safety and police for Black communities does not coexist, which is a really intense statement. So I want us to turn our attention now a little bit to what are some of the ways that community safety is created currently in or by communities, and what else is needed other than police. I think sometimes people think police is the only option to be safer, when so many communities feel that the police are not creating safety at all. So what are some ways community safety is being created by communities? And then what would be the role of police in that? Or is there no role? What do these alternatives look like? So I'm going to ask Elene this time to go first, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think as a migrant, as racialized and particular sex worker and massage worker, so that I think as the speakers talk about is like the police is not the solution. Police is not making the community safe. Instead, they often prevent the community from imposing some safety measures. So one of the example is like from a massage worker. So why they like to work in massage parlor? Because they think that is like they can work with other people. For them, it's more safe, and also they often are being located in the commercial area that they feel that if something happened, they can get more support. But what happened is the bylaw often to relocate the massage parlor as the industrial zone that is nowhere from any support. And so some of the basic measures, so for example, for workers, it's very important. They can lock the door to screen the client to see whether some people is hiding. So this is the knowledge that how the workers share and exchange with each other to protect themselves. But then when they lock the door to protect the safety, actually they will get charged and they will get fined. So that often they need to decide between whether I need to be robbed or I need to be robbed by the people take the money, or I need to rob by the city to get the money by the fine. So, and the other example is like for particular sex worker community that they have developed a lot of way to protect each other. So for example, some worker may have better English, they may help other workers to do the communication, translation, and also like discussing about the content of the service. So this is very important negotiation that the worker can like set their own boundary, and then so to make the client to respect the boundary. But because of the criminalization, so the client is being criminalized, the sex worker is being criminalized if they help other people to negotiation. So this kind of safety measure that the community already have actually is being criminalized to make the workers is more difficult to protect themselves. And so that's why I think instead of like calling what police need to do more, and then we say that what the policymaker and the police and by law enforcement officer or this like law enforcement, they should do lesser work. So many work we don't need them to do because they just create more trouble, more problem, and prevent the community from supporting each other. And I think that is also very important to learn about what means transformative justice, because sometimes we also need to see what happened to the society, why some people, they do not have money, they need to go to other places, home to to take the property or like money of other person, what happened in this society, right? So, and I think that how when we see the meaning of safety different way, and also that how we learn from the community, because if different community is have the best idea, best knowing what is the best for them, and instead of support more policing, how to support the community to develop the different initiative that they can protect each other. And I think this is like more important. Yeah, thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Elaine. So I'm going to ask Audrey, what are some ways community safety is created currently in and by communities, and what alternatives could look like, what the role of police might look like? And you started talking about community ceremony, how ceremony is where communities feel safest. If you want to take that up and talk some more about other aspects of community safety being created by community.
Yeah, I actually would like to share a resource with you, which is a really good example of how we've had to create our own responses to violence. Let me make sure I'm screen sharing the right page. And thanks for, bringing up that embeddedness. I don't know if people know, but the police are, they come directly out of what is the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In case people don't know, that was created to remove Indigenous people from their land. So this is like the historical origin of policing. It's to make way for settlement. And after the RCMP were finished with that, the next thing they did was take the children, and they put the children in prisons that they call residential schools. And what we're now hearing about in the mainstream, but we as a community have been talking about for many years, that there are mass graves around these prisons. So I do not see a role for police in our future. I am, really committed to decolonization, which for me in that, and for No More Silence, abolition of police and prisons is implicit in that, and we're not going to have to start from scratch. We had Indigenous justice systems that existed for thousands of years that we can go back to and that we can build on. In the meantime, I'm going to share a resource with you, because I recognize this is going to be a long struggle, and it's going to be a long way. It's exciting to hear in my lifetime so many people take up the calls for abolish, dismantle the police post George Floyd, but also Regis Korchinski-Paquette, who was an Afro-Indigenous woman who not too long after George Floyd died after an interaction with the police where her mom had actually called for a wellness check. And it is horrifying to look at how many Black and Indigenous people die as a result of asking for help, which is like a big reason why this doesn't happen so much anymore. And there are attempts now to create an alternative to having the police come. And I know that some community members, Indigenous community members, are involved with that. I believe the Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction folks are working together with Two Spirits of the First Nations and the city to develop their own crisis response, which I think, we're really suited. We have so many elders in the city, like Wanda, others who are working out of various other institutions who can provide that kind of care that is so needed in crises. But just let me share another resource that I had the opportunity this was like a great opportunity when I was wearing both hats. My No More Silence collaborated with Aboriginal Legal Services, and I've taken you to to our website, to the ALS website. And you would just go to resources and click on missing people resource. And then you're going to find the documentary that I made here. It's called Not Just Another Case When Your Loved One Has Gone Missing or Been Murdered. And it's about 39 minutes. And this was funded by the Law Foundation, which is made up of a percentage of lawyers' fees. And one of its main purposes is to educate the public and lawyers. And so we had a budget that allowed me to travel across the country and interview community members, families of missing and murdered loved ones, and get their experience. Because I'd already done that once in 2004 when I was working at CBC Television. And then this project was many years later, but so little had changed This was 2016, 2017, where we did this work, and where you will, in the course of this video, get to hear from people and how they ended up having to help themselves. So basically this video is, this is what you can do if the people who are supposed to be helping you don't help you. Okay, so what do you do when someone goes missing? And we have people walk you through that. The cool thing when you make a documentary that is online is everything that's cut and doesn't make it into the documentary can still be made available to people. Like, so if you go here, missing persons resource video, you can click on each individual interview that we did with folks by province. This is the mother of Cheyenne Fox. We had a terrible year in Toronto in 2013. That's 10 years ago, I realized last Tuesday, that it's been 10 years since, in the short space of about 7 months, we had 3 violent deaths in our community. First Tara Gardner, then Cheyenne Fox, and Bella Laboucam McLean. And so I did get to interview their family members. This is Ontario. Bev Jacobs used to be the president of the Native Women's Association of Canada. She was signatory to the first report that Amnesty International did around missing and murdered women back in 2004. But yeah, also traveled to BC. That's Bella's mom, Annette McLean. This is Cindy Simpson. She's the only person I have ever heard describe a positive interaction with police in all the decades that I've been doing this work. And she herself attributes it to looking white. So I encourage you, if you have time, this is an example of what we do because we don't get the help that we need. We create our own resources. So you will find out here what to do if someone has gone missing, how to make the police do their job, like how to advocate properly with police, how to use social media to put pressure on them. In the rare case, because unfortunately most of these cases remain unsolved and cold, but in those cases where there is someone charged, arrested and charged, and it actually goes to court, there's a good section in this video that walks you through how to survive that horrible ordeal of, attending court when the murderer of your loved one is being tried. There's also a section around community responses, and you'll hear about the strawberry ceremony there. So yeah, this is one example. I think I already said, I'm going to stop sharing now. A lot of folks on this call asked for reform. There has been so many documented efforts of police reform where a lot of money has been put into reforming the police. It hasn't worked. We're still experiencing the same levels of police violence and discrimination. So unfortunately, I was reminded, like, we recently got a new police chief, and there was a lot of attention thanks to a couple of activists, Chanel Gallant and JP Hornick. They were they experienced police brutality during a raid of the Pussy Palace, a women's queer bathhouse back in the early 2000s, where police went in and ended up being, it became clear that it was a human rights violation. They had no good reason for going in there, where women were bathing and having a good time. One of the officers involved is our new police chief. And Chanel and JP Hornet, they asked for a public meeting with our mayor, well, no longer with the former mayor, to explain why someone like that, who had a record of human rights violations, would be accorded this role. But that they were offered a private meeting, but not a public meeting. So we don't have any answers to that. I want to call attention to a great article that was recently, here, I guess I could share that too, that Desmond Cole wrote on February 15th. Here, about who is leading police oversight and professionalism. The head is a Toronto cop who has killed 2 Black men. This is who they put in charge of their own oversight and professionalism. So I don't have a lot of confidence in reform. when I think about, is there anything that police can do sort of like in the short term? I can say that I would like them to share their tech. They have like great resources. And one recent, like in the last couple of years, experience of assisting a family whose daughter had been trafficked, we were actually able to find her, because even though the police refused to take this family's report, the family was a Cree, it was basically the grandparents of the girl who were calling from a northern community, and they were hung up on by the non-emergency helpline. And when I called as a paralegal, I was told that they didn't speak English. Well, they had a thick accent, Indigenous accent, but they did speak English, and they were very clear, but the police just did not want to do their job and accept that missing person report. But in the course of taking over that advocacy, they employed their resources and their ability to track the person's debit card. And so we ended up being able to find this woman, this young woman who was being trafficked. So there's things that they can do that they unfortunately don't do unless they're really prodded to do, and that we could do better, but we would need the capacity to, you know, to have that kind of tech, as one example. But, you know, for our part, for No More Silence, we'll continue to build our own community capacity. So I believe in neighborhood safety groups who can respond and who can be a presence if someone is being harmed. There's all kinds of ways that communities, like on a grassroots level, can empower each other to keep their members safe. Thanks, that's all for now.
That's so helpful to give those specific examples of how communities are keeping each other safe. Fareeda, do you want to talk a bit about some ways you've seen communities keep each other safe and what alternative solutions might look like and what the role of police should be moving forward?
Yeah, sure. And I think this is one of my sort of favorite questions, because it involves sort of, you know, thinking about the best case scenario. But I want to start by just clearly sort of laying out what defund the police means, because I think there's a lot of discussion of what it looks like. And this is all from Black Lives Matter Toronto. But this is exactly what it means. And I think I'm just going to take some time to just go through that so that we can all be on the same page. So at the core, defund the police really just means that you're taking a percentage of the Toronto police budget and you're putting it towards communities that need it. So we talked a lot about issues on the TTC, right? This has become one of the most topical issues. And we talked a lot about, and I think there's a lot of us having these conversations amongst ourselves, of why are there so many issues on the TTC? And I think a lot of that can be traced to the housing crisis. And this is like where the defund the police conversation comes in. It's about taking money from police, billion-dollar budgets, okay? They have lots of money, and putting it into things like public transit, public health, public libraries, and helping people who are actually in need of them. And Jen, you said, you know, we've seen that the solution to a lot of this TTC, you know, fear and the sort of assaults that we've been seeing is to increase police presence. And that does not work. So at what point are we going to not keep on doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, hoping that things will change? Why don't we try something new? So under the defund the police umbrella, there's the demilitarized police, right? And you can read all of it, but essentially demilitarized is taking the military out of police. So removing certain kinds of weaponry, including tasers and things of that nature, that increase the chance that somebody's going to be seriously injured, harmed, or dead. And the mass surveillance of communities. I think somebody just raised this. You know, facial recognition, those kinds of technologies are going to become really, really big. I just saw, forgive me, I just saw something on social media where folks went to a Drake concert and there was facial recognition outside of the concert and every face was being registered. I think that should concern people in the community. And so when we talk about demilitarizing police, that's part of the conversation. We're also talking about police officers in schools. And that has a lot to do with the school to prison pipeline. What we see, and this is why at BLAC we talk about policing holistically, what we see is that Black children are disciplined at a disproportionate rate. And oftentimes with Black children in schools, police are called. And when police are called, the chances of charges being laid becomes higher. And then the youth has to go to criminal court. The youth has to deal with all of that criminal process. And so now we've essentially taken something that potentially could have been resolved internally, moved it outside into the criminal courts. And now this young person is going to have to deal with the criminal process. And any subsequent issues is probably going to be elevated and dealt in the criminal process. And so removing cops in schools is a way to deal with children the way that children should be dealt with, especially Black children who, again, are disproportionately subject to discipline. Reducing the scope of police. I mean, it's broad, right? But you can see here, even ending policing on public transportation, what we see when we see police officers on transportation, or the I forget what they're called, but like they're the transit bylaw officers who give people tickets for failing to pay the TTC. Well, those are crimes of poverty. And so I think that removing money from a budget to put more money into people who need help is a more holistic and evidence-based approach than, again, putting police and ticketing poor people who ultimately can't pay the ticket. So essentially, what is the purpose? What is the end goal? And you can see documenting police violence. And I'll just briefly talk about decriminalizing poverty, drugs, HIV, and sex work. And Elene obviously talked really eloquently on that topic. But this is what we're talking about when we're talking about defund police, right? It's not just about removing police completely, but it's about looking at what is currently occurring for different communities, and especially the community that I work with. Policing is not working. And reforming police, giving police more money, that has not worked. So, you know, to echo the points of my colleagues on the panel, at what point, right, do we rely on the same kinds of things and expect a different outcome? Isn't that the definition of insanity? And so that's really what it looks like. And I think that if you're looking at an evidence-based approach and you're relying on evidence-based approaches, you're going to be a little bit responsive to this. And I also want to comment, when we talk about defunding the police, there isn't really any person who knows how this will fully look like. We're in the process of having conversations about the defund the police. I don't have the answer. None of the panelists have the answer. But we have evidence that says police aren't working. So we start by doing things that are, again, evidence-based to change those things. So, for example, and these are some of the alternatives, right? Crisis intervention, police-free, community-led trauma-enforced emergency services. Why don't we touch base with communities themselves and hear from those communities? What do they need? What kinds of resources, what kinds of support, what kinds of interventions, what kinds of people would they feel would support them in a meaningful and affirming way? I don't think that those are radical suggestions, right? To talk and listen to folks. Investing in community support, shelters, drop-ins, right? These are the social services that we were talking about. And essentially harm reduction policies all the way around. And again, yeah, these alternatives are all come from Black Lives Matter Toronto, and you can take a look at them. And I'm happy to also provide any resources for folks who want to see some of the statistics and the research on what is happening in the Black community in this province. So from my perspective, these alternatives are simply evidence-based alternatives that are responsive to some of the issues that I raised. And so I would encourage people, especially folks who said that they were looking at police reform, or they were not really sure about what defunding the police means. I would encourage you to look at Black Lives Matter and look at some of the things that are being recommended, and look in yourself. Is that something that would make you uncomfortable or not? And maybe taking the politicized conversation away and sort of responding more so with the evidence that is before us. So I'll stop there.
That was great, Fareeda. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering, with 14 minutes left, if anyone has any questions. I've seen some comments. in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, please send them our way. We have a bit of time for questions. I did want to give the panelists a bit of time as well to close out. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, and perhaps many of you are feeling that way too, that I could listen to these three folks for hours, sharing their wisdom about what's happening in communities, what alternatives look like, and how we get to a different vision. Obviously, if you look at the evidence and the facts, what we're doing is not working, and in fact is harming some communities significantly, to the point of people losing their lives in really significant ways. And so what can we do? We have this vision. It doesn't have to be eliminating the police overnight. And it, maybe seems scary because many of us, none of us, as Fareeda has said, has actually seen this really fully happen. But it could be as simple as really giving communities the power to name their solutions and to have the resources to enact those solutions. So I don't see any more questions. So maybe I will just give each of the panelists a couple of minutes for final words on what we absolutely need to focus on next. So we have people who have been shown the evidence that police don't work, and yet they're not changing their opinion. So what can we do in the short term to create more openness to these alternatives and to resourcing communities who can really make a difference in people's lives around community safety? So I am going to ask Fareeda to go first this time.
Okay. So the call to action, what ultimately what I would suggest in terms of how do we go forward? How do we move forward? I think the first thing from my perspective is we have to think about the impact of all of this. A lot of times, in the work that I do, I'm a lawyer, and for us, it's about litigating and stuff. But really, I like to go back on an individual level and understand the impact on my clients and on myself, the psychological and emotional pain of racism, dealing with racialized microaggressions, and the burden that is being placed on communities who are experiencing the most sort of soul-crushing experiences. So for me and for you, I would encourage you to think about the impact. Oftentimes when we talk about racism, people say, well, that's not what I meant. Even interpersonally, that's not what I meant. An employer will say, that's not what I meant, but that's not what the impact was. And the impact is really the center and the key that you have to think about. Also in our work, in your work, in your family, talking to your friends, these are just some things that I keep in mind when I'm doing my work. It's important to think, to know that power and privilege, oppression, because of power and privilege, oppression is not equally distributed amongst communities of color. And so it's for Black communities, it's extremely important that you talk about anti-Blackness specifically and not just racism. And people of color cannot be used interchangeably with Black communities. Examining anti-Blackness and pro-whiteness, white supremacy within our cultures and with our upbringings, acknowledging that people of color and Black people can be complicit in oppression of Black people, right? We have to be aware of our own fragilities and understand that nobody is exempt. And ultimately, ending anti-Black racism helps us all. Yes, and again, addressing anti-Black racism does not equal diversity, it doesn't equal multiculturalism. I would like to say that I see combating anti-Black racism and racism more broadly as a group project. I see Audrey and Elene and Jen and all of you, we're all in this group project together. And different people in the group project have different responsibilities, and it means that we're going to have different strategies, different expertise, but we're all working to a common goal to deal with the lack of safety that our respective communities experience on a day-to-day basis. And so I would encourage you to think about ending racism and even using an evidence-based approach when you're having these conversations about defund police. I would encourage you not to be scared about having these conversations And even just allowing people to go on a hypothetical and say, if we would allow our imaginations to go, what would an ideal society look like for us in our community? And I think at the moment we can start imagining something different than what the current system that we have and that's available, I think that we'll start seeing different possibilities. And like I said, I don't have the answers. Nobody has the answers. This is a process. And I'm excited to do the work and be in that process with all of you. And hopefully we can keep going and going and going, because we stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us, and the generations that come next will do the same. But we hope that we'll get there eventually if we keep working at that project together. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Fareeda. I would love to work on a group project with you and Elene. Elene, any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think I love the idea of like Fareeda just say this is a really important joint project together. And I think this is also like remind us that we may need to have like more learning from each other, to learning about the struggle of different community, and so that how we can be the allies to support each other in this like big joint project, so that how we can support each other in this collective fight and like to going to the common goal. And the other thing I think is also, as Fareeda said, so there is like a lot of like social issue, and like what we see as the safety issue is just the surface of representing some more like a fundamental problem, like for example homeless, for example mental health, and also the social injustice, so that how we can learn more about that. And also like instead of giving resources to the police and also the law enforcement, so that is like the resources our effort is contribute to the community. And many of, like for example me is migrant, and many people actually is come from different culture background. It's already, we have long history not relying on like police and policing or government to deal with a lot of issues, including like conflict within the community, you know. And also like there is a lot of things that we may need to develop and think about how, like Audrey have a lot of like resources that how we can use different creative way and imagination to create the alternative. And I think I want to stress again, many of the feeling of fear, feeling of unsafe actually is come from the discrimination. It's come from the racism. So that like, and many of that kind of fear may not be the real like endangers of the safety. So that's why I think this is also very important. We need to acknowledge our own stigma, our own discrimination, and then how to work together and learn more about different what issue of different community is facing, and learn how to interact with different people, so that like we can keep each other safe. And I think the other thing is the policing is not only police, right? So as like other speaker already talked about, so that the policing also through social work system and through the by law enforcement system, and then how they decide the state control, as Audrey said, that not only taking away the indigenous land, but also there is a lot of state oppression to protect certain people of power, particularly you know, the white people with wealth and resources. And then how we need to think about different social system, that the police is one piece, but how our social system, whether we can also imagine that not only the world without the police, but also imagine the world with the new social system, that maybe we can have more people to have a more free and enjoyable life in that. And thinking of that, I hope that this is only the beginning of the conversation. And one of the things we think is important fight for the rights and make people safe is like for sex workers often have a term is called rights not rescue. So instead of relying on law enforcement, you know, to rescue the people or to save the people, that many marginalized people, they're being oppressed, they experience violence, is because their rights is being taken away. So now is the government is talk about the regularization of the migrant, and many migrant is being oppressed or they experience violence is because they don't have the immigration status. So this is an important thing to support the Status for All campaign. Why sex worker disproportionately targeted by so many violence? Because sex worker is being criminalized, because they are being discriminated. So that's why remove that discrimination and remove the criminalization of sex worker and many other community is also very important way to make the community be more safe. So, and there is a lot of things can do, but we need the support from all of you. And like, for example, there is different resources, like there is a book called Beyond Survival. They, the activists, including Audrey, talk about what is the alternative to police, and Tai Ching Tom also have like some amazing resources. I also share some of the petition from Butterfly that hope you will support, because when you show the solidarity, that really be make our community have more power and to fight and against this giant policing system. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elaine. And a couple of minutes for you, Audrey, to close out your remarks. You're on mute.
I'm just kind of floored by the brilliance that has just been shared with me by Fareeda and Elene. I just want to echo both of you in the stating that this is, a collaborative effort that we're all going to need to work on together. I think No More Silence will continue to work on building our own capacity and encouraging, replicating the work that's being done across the country with things like bear clan patrols to keep communities safe, doing our healing ceremonies, inviting people to join us in these ceremonies, continuing to have these conversations with all of you. Yeah, that's about all that I would be able to add.
Thanks so much, Audrey. So we just have a couple of minutes left, and I see a really big question in the chat. So unfortunately, is it Berivan? We don't have time to get to that. But
I just want to speak to that really quickly. I just want to call people's attention to the NISA conference, because we're actually doing a panel on this very subject. We're calling it Decolonizing Justice and Abolition of Police and Prisons. It will be with a broad range of folks like Krista Bigcanoe, the legal director here from Aboriginal Legal Services, No More Silence members, and other really smart Indigenous women. That's in May. And there's also going to be a whole community forum on abolition on May 14th. So if you follow me on social media or No More Silence, check the webpage. We will be sending out more information about that in the coming months.
That's great. Thank you so much, Audrey. It's great to know that there's a number of events coming up where people can continue to learn and engage with this issue. So we'll be sure to share what we know in terms of these resources and events that are coming up after this webinar, and this session has been recorded, so please share it out with others. Thank you so much to all of you that have participated with open minds and open hearts to this panel, and to our wonderful speakers, to Audrey, to Fareeda, and to Elaine, and to OCASI for organizing this. And I'll just leave this thought from our panelists with you. How can we ensure that we focus on rights and not rescue, and that we take guidance from Indigenous ways of knowing that already has the solutions? These approaches have the right solutions to center community and wisdom within communities to ensure that communities are safe and that everyone is safe, not just a few of us. And we want to know, what's your role in this project? What's your role? When will you be an ally? How will you work in solidarity with others? When might you step up into a leadership role or a supporter role? What do you need to learn and unlearn and support others to learn and unlearn as we work towards racial equity and racial justice and safety, community safety for all? Thank you, everybody.